The air was thick, heavy with that damp, metallic scent you can only find in places abandoned for far too long. I hadn't planned to find the bunker, not really. I was just trekking through the mountains, following a path that had all but disappeared beneath the overgrowth. And then, there it was, half buried in the earth, a rusted metal door with a faded restricted sign, barely visible through layers of dirt and time. My heart raced, the excitement bubbling up like it always did when I found something forgotten by the world. This was a Cold War-era bunker, exactly the kind of thing that would blow up on my blog. My followers would go nuts over it. Plus, there was something thrilling about the idea of being the first person to set foot inside after decades. I could already imagine the photos, the eerie atmosphere, the story I'd tell. But the moment I pried the door open, that excitement was hit with a wave of something else. The air inside was stifling, carrying a musty stench that clung to my throat. It was dark, unnervingly so, with the faintest sliver of light cutting through the dust as I stepped in. The walls were cold concrete, wet in places where water had dripped down from cracks above. Every step I took echoed, loud, too loud for how small the space seemed. It was silent. Too silent. The kind of silence that presses on your eardrums, making you strain to hear anything, even if you didn't want to. It was suffocating. Something about this place felt wrong. And it wasn't just the decay or the loneliness of it all. No, this was different. It felt watched. Like the shadows in the far corners were holding their breath, waiting for me to move just a little closer. But I was in too deep now. I couldn't back out. That night, the bunker felt even more oppressive. I had set up camp in the main room, if you could call a dusty concrete slab a room, and I was trying to settle in, convincing myself it was just an ordinary abandoned relic. The steady drip of water from the ceiling was almost soothing, a reminder that this place was just old, crumbling under years of neglect. But then, the other sound started. At first, it was subtle, just a faint scratching, like something dragging across the wall somewhere in the distance. I brushed it off. This place was ancient, there were probably rats or some other critters lurking around. I told myself not to overthink it. But the sounds didn't stop. They got louder, closer, like claws scraping against the concrete. And then came the clicks. Metallic, rhythmic, echoing through the corridors like a slow, deliberate tap tap tap. It sounded too purposeful, like someone, or something, was moving in the darkness. I stood up, gripping my flashlight a little tighter, trying to shake off the growing unease. The beam cut through the thick air, casting jagged shadows against the walls, but every few seconds, it flickered, dimming for just a moment before stabilizing again. My breath caught in my throat each time the light threatened to go out. Then came the footsteps. Soft at first, distant, but unmistakable. The sound of boots on concrete, echoing down the long, dark hallway. My heart thudded in my chest as I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" Nothing. Only the sound of my voice bouncing back to me in the emptiness. I stepped toward the corridor, the beam of my flashlight trembling slightly in my hand. The footsteps had stopped, but my gut told me I wasn't alone. Something was there, just out of reach, hiding in the dark, waiting. I scanned the hall again, nothing. Just that unnerving silence. I tried to laugh it off, but it sounded hollow in the stillness. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that the bunker was no longer just a place. It was awake. And it was watching me. The next morning, my nerves were shot. I hadn't slept a wink, too on edge from the bizarre sounds and the constant flickering of my flashlight. But I hadn't come all this way just to turn tail because of a bad night. Determined to make the most of my time in the bunker, I packed up and headed deeper into its twisting corridors, hoping to find something that would explain why this place felt so wrong. The air grew heavier the further I went, thick with the musty scent of decay. The walls were lined with rusted doors, most of them hanging on broken hinges. Inside the rooms, I found decaying equipment, radios, old control panels, things I couldn't quite make sense of. Scattered across the floor were faded maps and crumpled military documents, yellowed with age. Some were in Russian, but even the ones I could read didn't tell me much. This place wasn't on any maps I'd seen, and there was nothing in the documents that said what the bunker was actually used for. As I walked through the dimly lit corridors, the stillness was suffocating. That's when I saw her. At the end of a long hallway, just standing there, was a woman. Her back was to me, and she was dressed in an old military uniform, one of those Cold War-era outfits I'd seen in history books. She stood so still, like a statue. At first, I thought maybe I wasn't alone in this place, maybe someone else had found the bunker and decided to explore like me. I called out, my voice echoing down the hallway. "Hey, you okay?" She didn't move. Not even a twitch. Something about her felt off. I couldn't explain it, but my skin crawled the longer I watched her. My heart started to race as I took a step forward, then another, my footsteps echoing in the cold corridor. I called out again, louder this time, "Hello?" That's when she turned. Slowly, so slowly, her head twisted around until her face was visible. Pale, almost translucent, and her eyes, empty, black pits, like she had no soul left inside her. My stomach dropped. Before I could even think to react, she was gone. One moment she was there, the next, nothing. Just the empty corridor stretching out in front of me, as if she had never been there at all. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my ears, trying to convince myself that I hadn't just seen what I knew I saw. I wasn't alone in this bunker. And whatever was with me, it wasn't human. My hands were shaking as I sifted through the papers I'd found, trying to make sense of what the hell I'd just seen. That woman, she couldn't have been real. But she was. I saw her, and I could still feel the cold dread lingering in the air where she'd stood. Determined to understand what was going on, I started rifling through every document, every faded scrap of paper in the bunker. Some were just old maintenance logs and supply lists, but in the back of a dusty, nearly rusted-shut cabinet, I found something that made my blood run cold, a stack of old classified files. They were brittle, the pages yellowing with age, but as I flipped through them, the truth began to unravel. This bunker wasn't just a shelter during the Cold War, it had been a part of some twisted, secret project. Psychological experiments. They'd been testing soldiers here, pushing them to their limits, trying to prepare them for extreme conditions. The files detailed disturbing accounts of these tests. At first, the subjects reported feeling restless, paranoid. But then things escalated. They started hearing voices, whispers echoing through the corridors. Some claimed they saw figures in the dark, people who weren't supposed to be there. The reports became more frantic, more desperate, describing hallucinations, erratic behavior, and worst of all, disappearances. Men simply vanished into the depths of the bunker, never to be seen again. I froze when I came across one name repeated in the reports, Captain Amelia West. The files said she'd gone missing during one of the experiments, vanished without a trace. Her body was never recovered, and her name was quietly buried with the project. That's when it hit me like a punch to the gut, the woman I'd seen in the corridor. It was her. It had to be. The uniform, the way she just disappeared. She was still here. And if she was here, then so were the others. The bunker wasn't abandoned. Not really. Whatever happened to those soldiers, whatever madness this place had driven them to, they were still trapped here. Still lurking in the shadows, watching, waiting. I suddenly felt like I was being suffocated, like the walls were closing in on me. This wasn't just an adventure anymore, this was a graveyard. A graveyard full of restless spirits, and I was trespassing on their final, twisted resting place. I needed to get out. I grabbed my gear with trembling hands, every instinct screaming at me to get the hell out of that place. I'd had enough of the nightmares lurking in this bunker, and I wasn't sticking around to see what came next. As I made my way toward the exit, the hallway felt longer, endless, almost. The darkness was thicker, like the air itself had turned heavy. Each step echoed louder than the last, like the walls were closing in around me. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not mine, someone else's. They were faster now, quick and deliberate, like whoever, or whatever, was following me was getting impatient. I quickened my pace, but the lights started flickering again, casting long, distorted shadows. And then she was there. The woman. The same one I'd seen before, but this time, her face was twisted, her eyes dark pits of anger. She stood at the end of the hallway, right in front of where the exit should have been. She didn't move, but I felt her rage, like it was pulsing through the cold, damp air between us. My breath hitched, and as I started backing away, I could hear them, the whispers. They surrounded me, overlapping, some telling me to leave, others telling me to stay. The temperature dropped, and I felt it, this cold breath, like something was right behind me. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to run, and I did. I sprinted down the hall, desperate to escape, but no matter how fast I ran, the exit never appeared. It was like the bunker had become a maze, twisting and shifting around me. The footsteps behind me grew louder, but when I dared to glance back, there was nothing. Just the woman's voice, soft and echoing all around me, "You'll never leave." I kept running, stumbling over debris, my heart pounding in my ears. Finally, I reached a door, throwing it open in a blind panic, hoping against hope it would lead outside. But it didn't. I found myself back in the same room where I'd started, as if I'd been running in circles. The air was suffocating, the whispers louder now, surrounding me like 1,000 invisible hands. The lights flickered one last time before plunging the room into total darkness. The last thing I heard, just before everything went black, was her voice, close enough to feel her breath on my skin, whispering, "You're one of us now."